Hey there everyone, it's Joel Reads Comics back again for another supercut, this time focusing on the Matthew Rosenberg Punisher run, and oh man, what a perfect time for this supercut, am I right? We got our first little teaser clip for Punisher One Last Kill coming to Disney Plus soon. Punisher's going to be in Spider-Man Brand New Day along with his battle van. How freaking cool is that? Never thought I'd live to see that. Marvel Legends is coming out with a big Punisher-style Hulkbuster Iron Man armor, which is basically, you know, a more beefed up version of the Warmachine armor he wears in this series. Yeah, this starts off as the Warmachine story where Frank steals the armor and, you know, goes and fights a one-man war in Russia. Pretty controversial story at the time. I know people were really against it, which I never quite understood. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was always a big Matthew Rosenberg fan. I think this story ages really well. I think, you know, people are always scared about the Punisher status quo changing, even though it inevitably always changes back. There's the Armor run, which is actually 2 volumes in and of itself, and then there's like 3 more volumes, which is more traditional, classic, neo-noir, street-level Punisher stuff. In fact, hey, it's this run where Punisher actually, you know, gives a very stern talking to those dirty cops for appropriating his symbol. Yeah, this is this story right here. In fact, it's probably the last truly long-running Punisher story when we take all the different volumes together. As popular as Punisher is, he's never actually ran all that long. Now, thankfully, I did these a little earlier in my career. These were like 2016 to 2018, so you won't have to worry about much quality drop-off, though in the last 2 volumes, I did try and experiment with the format a little bit there as part of my Story So Far series, so basically the only thing that's different is I'm a little talking head down in the corner, and if that bothers you, it shouldn't. In fact, you should laugh at it, because I'm pretty sure I recorded both of those during the height of COVID lockdown when I tried to cut my own hair. So if you want to see me looking like absolute shit, but also skinnier than I am now, but with a total fuck-ass haircut, you're gonna love it. So strap in, grab yourself a snack, and let's do it, everyone. Let's check out the complete Punisher run by Matthew Rosenberg.
Frank Castle is ready to enter the legacy era of Marvel. What does it hold for him? Well, a super awesome war suit for one. What else? Well, let's hop on in together and find out, shall we? So, the comic opens up on a very familiar scene. It's Brooklyn, it's nighttime, and a group of gangbangers are looking to buy a bunch of high-powered weapons from a group of Eastern European arms dealers. These two groups have the very poor luck of trying to carry out this deal within earshot of Frank Castle, the Punisher. A man who is to New York street crime what raid is to your average household insect. And oh my, Frank, you look a little different since we last saw you in the Becky Cloonan run. You've come down with a serious case of Bernthal face. It's almost as if you have a new TV show coming out soon or something and you wanted the book and the show to line up. The bad guys are forced to take cover. Granted, there's a lot less bad guys than there were when we started, as many of them are dead. If you're worried about this new Legacy series pulling its punches in the violence department, don't worry, it doesn't. In fact, this is still one of the very few Marvel books that actually gets sold with a parental advisory warning on it, so you know it's good. The arms dealers eventually realize, oh yeah, that's right, we have super high-powered weapons, we should probably use them to try and escape. These aren't your regular over-the-counter firearms either, these are weird Mass Effect-looking sci-fi weapons. The arms dealers make the very poor decision to try and escape on the very same boat they brought the guns into New York, and not thinking that, hey, this is not the Punisher's first rodeo, he was sure to rig that with explosives too. With the job well done, the Punisher is ready to return to the battle van for the night, which is also his home because he's kind of a homeless vigilante. He is, however, kind of shocked to find Nick Fury Jr. sitting there waiting for him with a very important proposition for Frank Castle. You see, you'll recall at the beginning of Marvel Legacy, S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of fell apart, which means Nick Fury is down all his agents. That still doesn't mean he's not trying to fight the good fight in the world. It just means he has to get creative and think outside the box. He tells Frank that those arms dealers he fought tonight are actually part of a much bigger threat, a rogue nation that recently had a rebellion and installed a brutal dictator. Fury says this would be a great chance for Frank Castle to fight for national security and perhaps even redeem himself a little bit for his actions during the Secret Empire. Granted, they never mentioned Secret Empire. Frank calls BS on this right away. He's no one's attack dog, and as we further find out, Nick Fury has ulterior motives for dealing with this brutal dictator. It seems that he's being backed by ex-agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yeah, that'll kinda happen when the government government checks for your super spy agency start drying up overnight, you're gonna have to go find work elsewhere. Fury's not an idiot though, he knows exactly what buttons to press with the Punisher and as such stresses all the innocent women and children who are being killed under this regime. You know, women and children just like his wife and children who died. Reluctantly, the Punisher agrees to do something about this, but if he's going to be invading a hostile foreign nation, battling an entire army and a group of super spies, he's gonna need a little bit more artillery. Luckily, Fury thought ahead on that one too, and there's a very important asset he wants Frank to steal back from the Air Force. That's right, everybody, James Rhodes' old Warmachine armor. It was just sitting there in storage, but now the Punisher is ready to make good use of it. Fury is sure to stress that this is a one-time thing, and once he's done, Castle will have to give the suit back, only I don't think that's going to happen so easily as the comic ends. Alrighty then, so in the last issue, you'll recall Agent Nick Fury got everyone up to speed on the current political climate of Chernaya, a Eastern European country that's totally not Russia, but is absolutely Russia. Ever since one General Petrov has risen to power, human rights violations and general atrocities are at an all-time high, like these jackbooted thugs here ready to kill an old man on his farm for not giving them the right crops in tribute. Luckily, the Punisher just so happened to be flying by in his awesome new war suit and as such decides to help out. Of course, he's not really mastered the whole advanced technology thing yet. Not that he particularly needs to. Frank Castle had no problem killing dudes with his bare hands before, now they're robot hands and he's bulletproof on top of it. Frank is ready to continue his quest to the capital to take out the evil general, but he figures it would be in bad taste to leave this old dude unprotected, especially because all these soldiers' buddies will be coming back for revenge soon. Turns out this farmer actually has lived one hell of an interesting life. Like Frank, he was a soldier once, he had a family, children, but they're gone now. He gives Frank a place to lay low as well as the opportunity to learn how to take the safeties and limiters off the Warmachine suit so he can get the absolute most killing potential out of it. This also means the two old beaten down war dogs get a chance to talk about life and love and what was it all worth. Will the fighting ever end, especially when every generation there seems to be a new group of angry young men willing to kill for a cause, then eventually just kill for no cause? Will there always be tyrants like Petrov claiming to recapture former glory for their nations only to drag all of its populace kicking and screaming back into the past? Some very heady and important questions that will need to be answered another day, because that night another group of soldiers are ready to raid the farm. Of course, Frank is more than willing to fight them, and now that he has more control over his Warmachine suit, he takes almost perverse pleasure in taking them apart piece by piece. What I find especially compelling about these scenes is that, like most of the Iron Man suits, the Warmachine armor comes with a built-in AI, which means Frank actually has someone to talk to in the heat of battle. The suit's AI is also a little on the dry and sarcastic side, which means Frank Castle ends up playing straight man to his own suit of armor. Now, despite all these new upgrades, the Punisher is not invincible. His weapons will still overheat and need time to recharge, and even the Warmachine suit can only take so many blasts from a tank before it will fall apart. And hey, you know what's another thing the suit can't do? Bring people back from the dead. Yeah, poor farmer guy, for all of his help for the Punisher, ended up catching a stray bullet defending himself in the fight. If nothing else though, he did get that one last glorious fight that he was hoping for, and he says that maybe Frank would be better suited dropping his weapons and playing farmer like he did. Okay then, so as the comic opens up, we're treated to another dour scene letting us know exactly what kind of country Chernaya is and what kind of regime Petrov runs. As a young boy is dragged away kicking and screaming from his mother to be taken away for re-education with the biggest set of finger quotes money can buy. Luckily, this kid has a gun-toting, stark armor-wearing guardian angel in the form of Frank Castle, who hops in just in time to save him. In a bit of gallows humor, we find out the kid was getting dragged away not because he was some sort of radical dissident against the Petrov regime. Nah, he was just gay. And he hopes that the Punisher won't share that fact with his mother, mainly because he doesn't want to have to explain himself. Oh man, we're really through the looking glass here, people. If you didn't already think that Petrov was basically Putin and Chernaya was basically Russia, well, here you have it. Now luckily this kid won't be heading off to the camps, but there still is a camp, and Frank figures what better place to look for information about his target Petrov than by paying them a visit, a violent visit no less. The Punisher finds no information, but in liberating the camp he becomes something of a hero and an icon to all of those locked up in there. He becomes the breaker of chains. He's freaking Daenerys Targaryen over here. This, as we discover, is just one of many grim camps scattered all across the countryside, and the Punisher figures, hey, if I can't get to Petrov, then if I disrupt enough of these camps and kill enough of his boys, surely he'll have to come to me. And the Punisher does just that, but you can only cause so much wanton destruction before you eventually catch the eye of Petrov's elite guards, the turncoat shield agents that Nick Fury was so worried about. These guys aren't your regular rent-a-spies either. They come complete with their very own set of Stark-inspired power armor, and considering that the government had the Warmachine armor before, this makes sense. The guy Frank ends up fighting is a real punk too, making fun of him for being old, slow to adapt, and unable to work the new technology in the suit that he got. The Punisher, as we discover, does not take this ageism lightly because, as he puts it, it doesn't matter the equipment, what matters is the soldier wielding it, and then he crushes the dude's eyes. Granted, that's just one guy down of a whole team of armored former SHIELD agents who are able to give Punisher, even in his new suit, a run for his money. Oh, he puts up a hell of a fight, managing to flash fry two of the others when they thought that his suit wasn't working anymore before leading them on a giant flight chase. It's right around here strength and numbers start to bite our hero in the ass, plus his suit suffered some pretty serious damage in the previous fight, which means as the comic ends, the Punisher starts floating to the bottom of the ocean, his suit soon to be his tomb.
Well, picking up from where the last issue left off, Frank was left for dead in the ocean by the rogue SHIELD agents working for Chernaya's corrupt leader, Petrov. Frank is saved by some fishermen, proving once and for all that it is the Punisher and not Crab that is the deadliest catch. The Warmachine's suit was seriously damaged, which means if Frank wants to get back into the fight, he's going to have to go low-fi for a bit and find someone to fix it. And as Chernaya has no genius bar or YouTube tutorials, he opts to kidnap one of the rogue SHIELD agents in hopes of using his know-how and the parts from his suit to fix up his own. It's in this issue too, we also get to see where the rogue SHIELD agents have been camping out, complete with their very own armor workshop and personal mad scientist. Let us not forget Nick Fury never actually told the Punisher that some of these guys he would be fighting might have their own armor, so needless to say he's pretty pissed at Fury and gives him the third degree the next time they talk. Fury hilariously claps back by saying he refused to be lectured on morality from a guy who gets off setting muggers on fire. He also tells him that the guy he kidnapped was a junior member before turncoating, so he's barely earned his stripes yet and has no information. When Frank figures this out, he shows just how cold-hearted he can truly be by executing the guy. Now, the ultimate mission still remains the same. Frank has to track down Petrov, the leader of Chernaya, but that's hard because, like most dictators, he's a coward who refuses to surface. Once the Warmachine suit is back online, though, the Punisher opts to go after all the military leaders he can find, picking them off methodically one by one, so eventually he has to be taken seriously. This not only manages to catch the eye of General Petrov, but it also catches the world's attention. You see, Petrov says that if the American vigilante known as the Punisher does not cease his aggression in his country, then he will treat it as an act of war and launch nukes at the United States. And of course this guy has nukes. What self-respecting Bond-esque villain doesn't have a stockpile of nukes? Nick Fury tells Frank to pull back, but shocker, he doesn't do it, the nukes being yet another thing Fury just, casually decided to leave out of the conversation. And I mean, can you blame Frank Castle? You can call him many things, he's a trigger-happy maniac, but he is certainly not the sort of guy to leave a job half-done. And alrighty then, so as we join the comic, General Petrov is celebrating his victory over the Imperial Pig Dog Americans, or, something like that. He waved his nuke dick around in the previous issue, and it seems like everyone else in the world is backing down and letting him get away with whatever he wants. That is, of course, except for the Punisher and his Warmachine suit. Now, it was clear from the jump that Petrov was crazy, but it's made very clear this issue that he really had no idea what he was dealing with in the Punisher. He says he has legions of young men ready to die at his command. Frank says, cool, bring it. Petrov says the eyes of the world media are on Chernaya right now, and would the Punisher go as far as to assassinate the recognized leader of a sovereign nation, even though it could cause an endless amount of strife? Again, the Punisher simply replies, yep, gonna kill ya, didn't get this fancy set of armor for nothing, get ready to die.
Petrov, revealing himself to be the coward that he is, gets ready to hide out in his bunker until the heat's off, but he does remember to send his elite guard made up of ex-SHIELD agents, what with their own high-tech armors. Now, for all intents and purposes, this is the real battle that the Punisher has been preparing for. You'll recall a couple issues back, these young impetuous punks actually managed to overwhelm our hero. But for round 2, Frank is smarter. He knows their moves. He knows to use guerrilla tactics against them to split them apart. This battle is especially effective because the whole time as the Punisher is killing these dudes, they're talking about what huge fans of his work they are. All the while this is going on too, Nick Fury is yelling in the Punisher's ear to try and get him to stop, but Frank has made up his mind. He's going to see this mission through to the very bloody end. Even if he was given bad intel by Fury himself, and even if this is all just in a vain attempt to clean up S.H.I.E.L.D.'s own mess. Because dang it, Frank is a good soldier, and once the Punisher sets his mind to something, he will not be deterred, even in the face of, well, an actual nuke being fired. And with no one else being even remotely close enough to deal with this threat, that means the only thing standing between the world and nuclear war is, you guessed it, the Punisher and his suit. Okay then, so picking up from where the last issue left off, after hammering Chernayan dictator Petrov into firing a nuclear missile at the United States, it seems that the only hope to stave off Armageddon is the Punisher. The first hurdle is of course going to be catching the speeding missile. The Punisher is only able to do this by dropping the weapon systems and any excess armor from his Warmachine suit. A nice visual metaphor that reminds us Frank is the sort of hero who's not afraid to make a lot of sacrifices, put himself in harm's way, and show that at the end of the day he only saw the suit as a tool and nothing more. At great personal risk to himself, the Punisher grabs the nuclear payload, and this is where the fun really starts to begin. He starts threatening Petrov's goons with fear of nuclear death. And I mean, hey, if this were Spider-Man or Captain America, you know full well he's not gonna nuke everyone to make a point. With Frank Castle, he might very well nuke everyone to make a point. It's here Nick Fury is forced to step in a very clever bit of writing. We see that the former head of S.H.I.E.L.D. just didn't turn the Punisher loose willy-nilly with his own murder suit. He was sure to put a failsafe in case of just a situation like this one. This EMP device not only cripples Frank's Warmachine suit, but it does the same for the turncoat S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who are currently serving Petrov. This means as we go into the final battle, the playing field is nice and even. Well, you know, I say nice and even, but as Frank so eloquently puts it in this issue, sure, you guys might be trained by S.H.I.E.L.D., but you forget S.H.I.E.L.D. is dead, and soon you will be too. But it's not the henchmen that the Punisher is after. This fight has always been with Petrov, and wouldn't you know it, he saved an ace up his sleeve for just this battle, his own Warmachine suit. This means to save the day, Frank will need to overcome one of the very tools that he himself was using during his current war-fighting crusade, and he does it pretty well. Again, this battle plays into the bigger theme of what Frank has been trying to get across all arc long, and that is it doesn't matter the weapon, it matters the type of soldier that's wielding it. It also totally helps that bouncing around in an Iron Man armor for the last couple issues has given Frank Castle a particular insight into where exactly the suits are at their weakest. In the end, the Punisher is ultimately able to overcome his foe and free Chernaya from Petrov's control. It's not a happy day for him, though. It rarely ever is for the Punisher. He's branded a terrorist by the international media. Nick Fury is steamed at Frank for disobeying orders, and worse still, he's now in the crosshairs of Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, who you'll recall was in a relationship with Rhodey, the previous Warmachine, before his death. But hey, this is the Punisher we're talking about after all. He doesn't do what he does for kudos, he doesn't do it for pats on the back, he does it because someone needs to do it. Why he even ultimately decides that maybe he should hold on to the suit until they take it from him certainly makes his job of mowing down mafiosos that much easier, doesn't it? So as we begin this comic, we get to visit the bar with no name. Yeah, I know Chip Zdarsky technically gave it a name, but no name is cooler. Apparently the bar has been seeing a downturn in business. No, it's not the bad economy, and no, it's not because Westworld is on, it's because everyone's afraid to go outside, what with the Punisher running around with his own Iron Man suit. The D and Z list villains that make up the front room of the bad guy bar say, meh, you know what, even the Punisher, as crazy as he is, would never come rolling up in here, would he? He then thusly runs up in there. Most of these guys couldn't tangle with the Punisher when he didn't have a suit, and now that he has his own own robot suit, it's like murdering fish in a barrel. Very easy. Of course, the Punisher doesn't just want D-list losers like Steeljaw. No. He set his aspirations much higher, what with having toppled a corrupt government in the last arc. He wants big-name villains like Bullseye, the Rhino, and Scourge. Is Scourge technically a big-name villain? I mean, he's at least a B-plus player. And Frank would have gotten away with murdering all of these costumed criminals too if it wasn't for the late intervention of Captain Marvel Carol Danvers. You'll recall she was in love with Rhodes, the man who owned that armor before Frank. She sees what the Punisher is doing as a gross corruption of the Warmachine name and Rhodes' legacy, and I mean, she's not exactly wrong. It doesn't exactly send a good message to the rest of the superhero community when you're running around using a dead guy's toys. Frank fires back by saying, "Hey Captain Marvel, I've never actually been part of your little superhero club, so don't hold me to those standards. Second of all, I don't do the whole hero versus hero thing, even though you seem to be a big fan of it, so I'm just gonna leave now. And if you want the Warmachine armor, well, you're going to have to kill me for it." Which, I mean, shouldn't be a problem for you because you almost killed Iron Man in Civil War 2, but you just ended up putting him in a coma. Captain Marvel scoffs at the idea of the Punisher, a mad dog killer, actually trying to take the moral high ground, especially after backing Hydra during Secret Empire. Thank you, Matthew Rosenberg, for actually acknowledging this fact and not just beating around the bush about it. Frank has no answer for that either. He just shoots Captain Marvel in the face and runs away. But hey, their fight was so big and so loud it's alerted all the other heroes of New York. Daredevil comes to Frank Castle next. "Hey, occasional buddy, occasional enemy, you wanna maybe stop what you're doing, turn yourself in?" We also find out that Nick Fury is coordinating all the different heroes to go after Frank after him breaking ties with him in the previous arc. Makes me think that Frank should really just out Nick Fury and say, "Yeah, I have the armor, he gave it to me." Frank manages to give Hornhead the slip. Next up to try and take a swing at him is actually Clint Barton Hawkeye. Frank does something truly unexcusable to the Archer. He steals his pizza. I joke about Hawkeye, of course, but at the end of the day, he actually ended up being the most useful in this fight. He remembered to actually tag the Punisher so the rest of the heroes could follow him back to his base of operations. The Warmachine suit has also taken a major beating in the fight with Captain Marvel, and now that it seems that the rest of the Avengers are ready to try and take it from Frank's cold dead hands, it might not last much longer as the comic ends. Okay then, so as the last issue had left off, the Punisher was staring down a mob of superheroes all hell-bent on bringing him to justice. Frank is certainly not going to surrender, and he's definitely not one to back away from a fight even when the odds are pretty insurmountable. I mean, that's basically his character. He fights a never-ending war on crime and corruption that's never-ending for a reason. To the Punisher's credit, though, he does manage to use his superior tactics and the power of the Warmachine suit to take out some D-list heroes that no one would really care about, like Tigra and US Agent. You know, just two characters who were probably super happy Captain Marvel invited them to the Manhunt party. Things get rougher, though, when the Punisher comes face to face with some of the Marvel Universe's heaviest hitters. Your Herculeses, your Luke Cages, your Things. They do a massive number on the suit, which means Frank is forced to retreat. Now he's on the run, but moreover than that, he needs to find someone who can repair his suit. This means he leads some of our favorite heroes all across New York City on a wild goose chase, trying to hunt him down everywhere he goes. First, Frank tries to look for the Tinkerer, and when that doesn't work, he opts instead to turn his attention to another AIM Splinter faction made up of a bunch of weekend warrior would-be supervillains. Frank shoots his way through all of them until he finds one guy who majored in robotics in school. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering, hey, how come Frank just doesn't tell the rest of the superheroes that Nick Fury put him up to it? He wouldn't be lying. In fact, it was Nick Fury that turned Carol Danvers after him. Even going as far as to exploit her grief over Rhodey's death and, you know, not mention the fact that that leader that the Punisher killed, yeah, that was kinda sorta on his orders. That doesn't happen, but the Punisher does eventually track Nick Fury down, him more or less being the true antagonist of this story. Nick says, you know what, even if he could call off the heroes, he wouldn't, as this is something that's been coming for a long time now. Someone finally willing to punish the Punisher for the things he did wrong. And that's, you know, not just for gunning down muggers all day, every day, or destabilizing nations. No, this still all comes back to Frank willingly joining Hydra during Secret Empire. What's new about this exchange, though, is that for the first time ever, Frank actually manages to show a little bit of remorse for the bad stuff he did. He says he wished wish he could take it back, but he doesn't know how. But once again, Nick Fury, being master manipulator spy that he is, gives Frank just a gentle nudge, saying, you could hunt down all the Hydra guys who managed to escape. That'd be pretty sweet. Although to do all that, the Punisher is going to need a little extra intelligence, and to get it, why doesn't he go to the Central Agency of Intelligence? They seem like a pretty good bet. Okay then, so picking up moments from where the last issue left off, the Punisher has made his way to the CIA headquarters looking for any information that he can find on the remnants of Hydra, including Baron Zemo. Now these CIA schmucks wouldn't have been able to stand up to Frank on his worst day. Now that he has his own set of Iron Man armor, he is an absolute force of frickin' nature. Don't feel too bad for them though. Rosenberg is sure to drop some hints to show us that the CIA has already been infiltrated on some level by Hydra. A neo-fascist force invading the highest positions of power within the United States? Topical. Frank, after fighting his way past waves and waves of cannon fodder, eventually gets his information and decides to hunt down Baron Zemo wherever he's hiding out. It would seem that even though despite Hydra's many, and I mean many, high-profile defeats, it hasn't hurt recruitment very much, as the Punisher is able to blow his way past a bunch of green-clad mooks blocking the door. When our hero does come face-to-face with Baron Zemo, this is where things actually start to get a little interesting. Baron Zemo prods at Frank, saying that it wasn't so long ago that they once fought under the same flag. Frank fires back by saying that even when they were on the same side, he still hated his guts. And, that his head is clear now, his heart is pure, and he's ready to get some violent retribution on these guys. Zemo isn't dumb, though. He was sure to hire some backup. We got the Ghost, who you can see in the new Ant-Man movie very soon, as well as Crossbones and even Taskmaster, which is pretty hilarious to me when we stop and consider Taskmaster sold out the Hydra top brass so he could be given immunity. I guess he needs the money. Frank is tough and refuses to back down. He gets a couple good hits in, but he couldn't prepare himself for the Ghost. After all, Ghost is an Iron Man villain and as such would be best prepared to deal with a power armor situation. Before Zemo can kill Frank though, he ends up getting saved by some rather unlikely folks. It's the Secret Avengers. Okay, that's not their real name, but it's what I'm going to call them though. They're the more Black Ops Nick Fury centric Avengers members. They knock out all the bad guys and then give Frank a choice. He can walk away right now without the suit and they'll be sure Nick Fury stays off his back. Everything can go back to normal and they'll pretend like this whole thing didn't happen. Obviously, the Punisher refuses to let any of this go, not while there's still work to be done. He says that this will never be over until he finally kills evil Steve Rogers and washes all the blood off his hands. And while Hawkeye and Mockingbird aren't exactly on board with this idea, it is way too good an opportunity to pass up for Winter Soldier and Black Widow. Well, technically the Black Widow clone. Again, they're doing some nice work crossing over Matthew Rosenberg's work in Tales of Suspense. They actively enjoy where Frank's head's at and says that if he's serious, let's leave right now. Let's go kill evil Steve Rogers and put an end to the Secret Empire once and for all as the comic ends. Alrighty then, so in the previous issue, the clone of Black Widow as well as the Winter Soldier decided to belay their orders from Nick Fury, bringing in the Punisher, and instead decided to join forces with him for one last giant raid against the forces of Hydra and the evil Steve Rogers. The unlikely trio has taken over a taco restaurant so Frank can fix his armor, and it's made very clear that while he and Bucky, kinda respect each other, they certainly don't like each other. They start a dick measuring contest almost instantly, and Rosenberg writes probably one of the funniest things I've read in comics in a very long time when the Punisher says, "Hey, can't you fix my suit with your techno-virus arm?" Wait a minute, you think I'm Cable? Of course, it's Natasha who has to step in and be the adult in the situation, saying that their mission is much more important than anything they don't like about each other. The plan itself couldn't be more simple, but because this is superhero comics, you just know it gets way more complicated. They were just going to rush the front door and kill the evil Steve Rogers to get it over with, but Hydra also chose to break him out on the very same day. Not that the Punisher seems to care all that much. You know how they say the more the merrier? Well, this is the more the murderer. Why, when Zemo ends up taking control of the prison and letting all the superpowered crooks out, Bucky and Natasha aren't sure what to think about this, but Frank is so happy. He's literally dreamed about moments like this when he can mow down a bunch of bad guys with no repercussions. Again, this issue is peppered with some truly laugh-out-loud moments of dark humor. Some of the supervillains say, hey, it's Warmachine. Warmachine doesn't kill, right? I'm not Warmachine, flamethrower. Of course, even the most fun rampage sprees eventually must come to an end, and in this case, it happens when Captain Marvel and the rest of the superhero community show up. Needless to say, they have a lot of questions like, what the hell is going on here? And, hey, Black Widow, hey, Winter Soldier, we're gonna need to talk when this is all done. Frank is a man utterly possessed, though. He's not going to let anyone stop him, friend or foe. He figures that no matter what happens, at the end of the day, they're going to take this suit away from him, so he better make it all worth it by killing Evil Steve. This is why he's so willing to fight his way deeper and deeper into the bowels of the prison. Evil Steve definitely is there. This isn't a fake-out situation, but for Punisher to deal with his ultimate foe, he's going to have to go through the man who built his armor in the first place. Yep, that's right, it's Iron Man, everybody. And again, if it's Tony himself showing up right here, right now to confront the Punisher, he's alive, which means Rhodey's alive, which means they're going to have a lot to discuss, but in the next issue, of course. Alrighty then, so picking up directly from where the last issue left off, the Punisher was staring down Iron Man. Tony is understandably pretty pissed off about everything Frank has been doing with his technology, as well as, you know, dragging the good name of Rhodey through the mud because of Frank's own personal vendetta against crime and corruption. Frank starts a fight because of course he does, but in doing so he also attempts to turn the tables on Iron Man by saying what kind of heroes would go out of their way to actively defend such Hydra scum. With Iron Man trapped in a burning tunnel, the Punisher is finally free to give chase to Zemo and the others who are escaping via helicopter. Man, you gotta wonder how many helicopters does Hydra and every other Marvel terrorist organization go through? The heroes destroy them like they're nothing all the time. That's gotta add up. Now, Zemo knows in a fair fight, even in an unfair fight, he probably can't take the Punisher. That's why he and the Ghost get creative. Ghost's phase shifts inside Zemo, basically meaning that Frank can't hit him no matter how hard he tries. All the while, Zemo harangues Punisher about his choices, how he willingly served Hydra before, and how at the end of the day he perhaps only now sees what the Supreme Commander, Evil Steve Rogers, saw in him. It was his determination that put him above any other rank-and-file psychopath who goes off to join Hydra. This very same determination means that Frank is totally okay sacrificing his own body if it means he'll hurt the bad guys too. He almost lethally shocks himself to try and get Ghost to phase back to reality, only to have Iron Man swoop on in and save the bad guys. This once again leads to a massive fight between the Punisher and Iron Man, where Frank does get the upper hand, and he would have pulled the trigger on Iron Man too, if Tony was not saved at the last second by the appearance of the Chimera assault vehicle, which you'll remember if you read the last issue of Dan Slott's Iron Man, so big ups for continuity. The Chimera is of course piloted by the newly resurrected James Rhodes, who is pretty ticked off at the Punisher for stealing his armor, even though if you read the Dan Slott book, he's too afraid to pilot it himself. Rhodey doesn't want to throw fists at Frank, though he actually tries to talk to him for a change, saying that the Punisher is a great many things, not all of them good, but at the end of the day, he's not a thief, and he thinks that if he asks nicely, he'll give the armor back. Frank concedes, but not before Rhodey eventually twists the knife in a little deeper, saying that perhaps the big difference between what the two do is that at the end of the day, a hero, not a vigilante, is someone willing to show restraint. Just because you can put on a robot suit and try and kill all of the criminal underworld doesn't necessarily mean you should. It's also heavily implied that Rhodey knows that it was actually Nick Fury who put the Punisher up to this, and that a lot of this manhunt was just Fury trying to cover his own ass. Evil Steve also gets a couple jabs in on the Punisher before he's eventually taken away. He says that any man who shows such ferocity will always have a seat at the Hydra table, and that he and Zemo, who managed to escape, have such horrible things planned for the future. The cops grab Punisher, and Fury is ready to throw him in a deep dark cell and throw away the key, but luckily it's good to have some friends on the outside because Frank gets sprung by Winter Soldier and Black Widow as the comic comes to a close. Alrighty then, so as we join the comic, a group of Hydra goons takes a British cargo ship hostage. Oh no, they've taken all the Jaffa cakes and the tea. Truly those green and yellow bastards have gone too far this time. We then check in with a minister from Her Majesty who's saying that we will not be negotiating with terrorists today. Nope, not now, not ever. To which a new beardy character is sure to say that these aren't regular terrorists you're dealing with, these are super terrorists, complete with their own super terrorist leader, Baron Zemo. What's crazy is that Zemo doesn't actually want money for the safe return of the crew. He actually wants this politician dude to push through some important legislation through the UN that Hydra has their eye on. But the whole situation only gets more complicated and stranger from there. You see, Hydra has actually gotten in bed with Roxxon, of all people, the evil oil company. Say what? 1%er big business and evil neo-fascists working together? Ah, pish posh perish the thought, only in the realm of comics, am I right? This meeting, though, isn't nearly as airtight as they think it is because they quickly end up getting chased by one of their very own trucks, which then rams itself into them. Yes, it would seem ever since their last run-in at the end of the previous Punisher series, Frank has had a major narc on for Hydra and especially Baron Zemo, with plenty of good reason. But I don't even think Frank can fully grasp what the villains are playing at right here. From there, we get to see Zemo having himself a little meeting with Dario Agger, the Minotaur villain and president of Roxxon, who tells him that they're gathering all sorts of support from China, Russia, North Korea, Canada, you know, all the bad nations, and that they have very big plans for Bagalia, aka that nation that Zemo kind of sort of rules sometimes when writers remember that he rules it. This new axis of evil also shows that they are absolutely not afraid to play very dirty and in some cases very violent politics when it comes to getting what they need. Now, what might end up throwing a major wrench into the bad guys' plans is the Punisher following their trucks back to the storehouse where they're stockpiling a ton of dangerous weapons, both practical and science fiction, including a frickin' tank, which you just know the Punisher is more than happy to take for a little spin. It's clear that these guys are looking for a war, and the Punisher's gonna give them a war they wouldn't believe. Now, wanting murder and destruction is all well and good when you're Frank Castle, but as I said before, the villains here are playing a much bigger game with a much bigger set of stakes in mind. They've chosen the Mandarin of all people to be their public face. His mission is to take the demands of Bagalia to the UN and use all their intimidated and extorted votes to see Bagalia become its own independent country, less of a rogue nation and more of a nation of rogues, if you will. The Punisher, as you might have guessed, takes umbrage with this, and before the politicians can cast their vote, the Punisher lets his voice be known with a bullet. Geez, you know, if international politics was this explosive and exciting, I might actually watch C-SPAN once in a while. The Punisher has seemingly saved the day for now, but he also executed someone on a very public stage, which once again makes him the enemy of Nick Fury, the superhero community, and of course Hydra. Not that the Punisher seems to care all that much. After all, this is absolutely where the Punisher loves to live as the comic ends.
Yep, from where the last issue left off, the Punisher is still chipping away at Hydra forces. He finds two goons passing information in Times Square from Baron Zemo. You know, probably between visiting the Hershey store and getting pictures taken with all the impersonators, regular Times Square stuff. The Punisher has been a thorn in Zemo's side ever since he got a hold of the Warmachine armor back during the last run, and now he's ready to spend whatever amount of money necessary to kill him. Too bad money doesn't seem to be enough to motivate the Marvel Universe's most deadly assassins and guns for hire, because, well, this is the Punisher. If you fight Spider-Man or Daredevil to just beat you up, you fight the Punisher, you end up dead. Zemo's methods are also rubbing up against Dario Agger, the head of Roxxon and his business partner right now, in getting Bagalia recognized as a nation. After all, Agger doesn't like to rock the boat. He likes to do things subtly with subterfuge and money, and hiring a bunch of assassins is not at all subtle. In fact, as Frank finds out when he tortures one of the Hydra agents, the message that Zemo was passing was telling all the different sleeper cells to go underground until they get this new law passed. What do you think Hydra sleeper agents do during their downtime? Crochet? Sudoku? Now, Frank is being anything but subtle in his quest to take down Hydra. He assassinated a man at the UN, shot another man dead at Times Square, and then decapitated another guy in the subway station. And because of that, he's now got a full NYPD SWAT team zeroing in on his lair. Now, cops are always tricky for the Punisher. He has a rule that when he's inside New York, he does everything he can to not kill members of the NYPD, even if they're dirty. And even if they're shooting at him like they are right now. The Punisher gets a very unexpected line dropped to him in the form of Nick Fury planting a cell phone in one of his battle vans. Fury tries asking Frank nicely to stand down, but these two aren't on good terms anymore after their last run-in, but Fury pretty much knew that was going to happen anyway, and as such, he put a lot of money into Plan B, hiring the heroes for hire, Luke Cage and Iron Fist. How does the Punisher fare against the bulletproof man and the magic kung fu expert? Well, it doesn't matter how bulletproof Luke Cage is, a grenade works as well on him as it does just about anyone else. And in something of a surprise twist, he can actually keep up with Danny Rand almost punch for punch, well, regular punches anyway, magic chi punches or something completely different. Luckily though, this is yet another one of those situations that Frank decides to solve with the proper application of high explosives. Seriously, this guy has dropped so much TNT in this issue, I'm pretty sure Wile E. Coyote is getting jealous out there. His final hurdle though is going to be Daredevil. Once again, Matt Murdock tries to get Frank to come in quietly. He's all beaten up after all. However, it looks like these two heroes might actually end up needing to save each other because the train the Punisher took refuge on comes under attack by all of those hired guns as the comic winds down. Alrighty then, so picking up from where the last issue left off, the Punisher is the most wanted man in the world after killing the Mandarin at the UN. The superhero community is out in force trying to round him up, including Daredevil. Old Hornhead thought he had the Punisher cornered, that is until a bunch of Hydra soldiers showed up to try and kill Frank themselves. Now, this is usually the point in any comic book story where two squabbling superheroes will put their differences aside long enough to save the day and each other, only here's the thing, Daredevil has been down this road so many times with the Punisher and he never ends up looking good at the end of it. All Matt asks Frank to do is to not use any guns in this situation, a suggestion which Frank wholeheartedly refuses. It's also around here too, you'll probably notice that the art has changed from the previous installment. This guy really has a way with masks, but as someone like Frank who doesn't wear one, he looks kinda weird and kinda melty, honestly. Now, working side by side, Daredevil and the Punisher are more than able to mop up all the Hydra ninja grunts, but like in any good bit of video game logic, once you deal with all the weaker foes, it's time to move on to the big boss. And in this case, the boss is, well, it's frickin' Bane. I mean, just look at this guy. Tubes all over his body, mask that looks like a luchador mask. It's friggin' Bane over here. Now, despite the fact that they're dealing with a literal monster, Daredevil goes out of his way to try and bring this guy down peaceably, just like he did all the other mooks. Frank could care less and opens up on him with grenades and gunfire. Ultimately, though, the Punisher wins this battle by outsmarting the hulking foe by getting him to touch the third rail on the subway, electrocuting himself to death, a fact of which Matt Murdock is not a fan of. In the end, though, Daredevil might actually end up getting the final laugh in this situation. He quite cleverly fakes a heart attack, and while the Punisher goes to pick up a med kit, the cops catch him. I like this scene a lot because it proves that Frank Castle isn't nearly as heartless as we believed him to be. He was willing to try and save Daredevil's life despite the fact that he was trying to turn him over to the cops. And it shows just how clever, tricky, and outside the box thinking Daredevil can be when push comes to shove. And once the cops actually have the Punisher in custody, the real hard work begins. So many different agencies in the world want to prosecute him right now, and here local NYPD is left holding the bag. The cops also get involved in that same argument everyone has surrounding the Punisher. Well, I think we should let him go. I think he does more to help the city than he does to hurt it, but I think he's a murdering psychopath and should be stopped. The cops also share a certain amount of confusion over whether or not the Punisher is working with or against Hydra anymore. In the end, though, the ball gets taken out of their court by Nick Fury, a man who has more than a few axes to grind with the Punisher ever since the whole Warmachine debacle a few arcs back. Yeah, it certainly seems like everyone wants a piece of the Punisher. Superheroes, super criminals, everyone's coming out of the woodwork, including, as the comic ends, his oldest foe, Billy Rossetti, aka Jigsaw. But does he want to break the Punisher out first before he kills him, or just kills him? Alrighty then, so picking up from where the last issue left off, the Punisher had been picked up by the police who were hoping to turn him over to Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. The only problem is there is no S.H.I.E.L.D. anymore. In fact, all of these agents are actually fakes led by Jigsaw, Billy the Beaut Rossetti, one of the Punisher's oldest and most hated foes. And can I just say, I love the little artistic flair here that every time Jigsaw is in panel, all of them have little stitches attached to them. Jigsaw's going all out on this job. Not only is there a big fat Hydra bounty on Frank Castle's head, but if he kills him, he'll also be killing the man who's bedeviled him pretty much his entire criminal career. He even shelled out extra money to hire the Chameleon, and man, it has just been way too friggin' long since we've seen the Chameleon in something. Frank tries to warn the real police, but it's a no-go, and once the bad guys realize that they're found out, they decide to kill everyone else around them to help keep the secret. Luckily, as one of the cops dies, he passes a gun to the Punisher in hope that he'll be avenged. And hey, you know,
note, if the Punisher is good at anything, it's avenging, and revenging, and pretty much everything in between. What follows is essentially Die Hard in a police station. As an outmatched and undergunned Punisher tries to survive the night, he ends up catching a bullet from Jigsaw before the real cops show up. Obviously, they don't know the full story and blame Frank for all the dead cops. Which means you can now officially add the NYPD to the ever-growing list of people who want the Punisher dead. First he ticked off Hydra, then he ticked off the superhero community, and now he's ticked off the police. In fact, he's making so many waves, Black Widow is wondering if her and Winter Soldier should even have sprung him in the first place if he's going to be this big a liability. But hey, Frank can give a hell of a speech, and he says that if he had ticked off Black Widow, she wouldn't have even come and asked what was up with him. She would have just shot him in the back of the head. Now, the Punisher's next mission is clear, and that is find Baron Zemo at all costs. But to do so, he's going to have to get a little creative. He crashes a Hydra induction ceremony, which, yes, takes place in a gymnasium. He shoots everyone he can find before he starts torturing a few of the Hydra grunts in uniform. Unfortunately, these are the rank-and-file members who don't know where Zemo or High Command is hiding. Luckily, our hero might not have to hunt that much harder that much longer, because it seems like Hydra High Command has found him. Namely, the Mandarin's little toady, who after his master's supposed death at the hands of Frank has decided to take up the 10 rings and their incredible power for himself. And it's on that we're all totally screwed note that the comic comes to a close. Alrighty then, so picking up from where the last issue left off, the Punisher was under attack by a Weasley little man named Winslow, who proudly declared himself the new Mandarin after inheriting the rings from his now deceased master. Only as we quickly discover, Winslow is playing Mandarin on easy mode because he's only making use of 2 of the famous 10 rings. Now obviously this is more than enough power to kill someone like Frank, but all that really means is that our skull-clad hero is going to have to get creative if he wants to keep out of the dirt for a little bit longer. The first part of his comeback is easy enough. Winslow is still new to controlling the ring's powers, and because of that, Frank is able to cut off one of his hands. Well, that's one ring down. Unfortunately, Winslow manages to rally and hard by forcing the Punisher onto a piece of rebarb that penetrates his very body. Ouch. Then poor Frank gets the air choked out of his lungs by a magic hand. It gets to the point where he starts to see the light and his entire life flashes before his eyes, including the moment he became the Punisher when his wife and children were killed in Central Park. That rather depressing trip down memory lane, though, proves to be just the kick in the pants the Punisher needs to win this fight, and he does so with one of the most creative and bloody maneuvers I've ever seen. First off, when the new Mandarin comes to gloat over Frank's dying body, the Punisher grabs him and forces him into the rebar, pushing it through himself so he can stab the bad guy in the heart. But wait, it gets better. Once he has him trapped, Frank then decides to gnaw off his other ring finger using his bare teeth. Oh my god. You sick fuck, I friggin' love you. The Punisher wraps up the rings and sends them off to Doctor Strange. After all, the last thing the Punisher wants to do right now is have to deal with any magical BS. Unfortunately, he's right back to where he started, still looking for Baron Zemo. This game of deadly cat and mouse that Frank has been playing with Zemo is getting harder and harder, mainly because he's killed all the rank and file Hydra grunts, meaning the only people left who actually might know anything are the older, more mellow members of Hydra's inner circle, the ones who have been able to dodge the cops, the heroes, and everyone in between up until this point. Of course, they've never come up against someone as determined as the Punisher before. Eventually, he tracks down a high-ranking member by the name of, wait for it, Spencer. Yeah, so it seems Spencer has kept up an email correspondence with Baron Zemo, and I bet he knows a lot about the Secret Empire, too. Frank read his emails, which means he now has the location of Zemo's last safe house in New York City. He doesn't have to kill Spencer, but he does it anyway because, hey, he's gotta celebrate somehow, right? When the Punisher does show up at the final safe house, he meets the last person he expected to see, Nick Fury. And no, this isn't another chameleon trick, this is actually the genuine article. How did Nick get there before Frank? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, Fury Jr. is still all sorts of steamed at Frank for everything that went down with the Warmachine armor, and because of that, he's put together a small team of Secret secret Avengers to bring the Punisher in once and for all. After all, they might not like Hydra, but at the same time, they just can't go gunning them down in public the way the Punisher has been. Frank tries to tell the other heroes that this is all some sort of crazy conspiracy against him and that there's no way Fury should have been able to beat him to the punch on this one unless he managed to broker a backroom deal with Hydra. And maybe the heroes would have believed the Punisher too if he wasn't, well, you know, the Punisher. And as the comic winds down, we find out Frank was 100% correct about Nick Fury Jr.'s dealings. He did indeed sell him out to Hydra in hopes that A, maybe Zemo wouldn't mess with the United States anymore, and B, maybe they'd just kill each other and give him 2 less headaches to worry about.
As Volume 2 begins, we actually get a rather interesting little take on the day-to-day life of Baron Zemo trying to run his own rogue nation, or a nation of rogues, as I called it previously, and it's not going well. It's going really bad. Apparently everything that Frank Castle had been doing to really try and hurt the nation and try and, you know, hurt people's support for joining the UN and everything, it's been working. They can't even get eggs in the country anymore. Zemo can't even have a nice breakfast for dignitaries. That's one of the fun things that Matthew Rosenberg really does with Zemo's characterization here, and that is he finds this sense of dark humor in the character that I don't think we've ever really seen before. I was instantly reminded of Mojo Jojo from the original Powerpuff Girls series, where it's like he's just so dedicated to evil. He just wants so much to be bad and to do bad things and take over the world, but little tiny normal everyday people stuff keeps getting in the way of his evil plans. And he's still scary and he's still intimidating, and, you know, he's still, you know, a worthwhile villain, but it's just, you know, you're laughing under your breath at him, and I thought that was really, really fun. When we do actually get to see Frank again, he's clearly been Zemo's prisoner for a long time. He's been torturing him, but he hasn't killed him yet because, you know, he has bigger, more villainous plans for him. This scene itself is actually, you know, a little hard to watch because we actually get some rather, you know, envelope-pushing torture. Obviously, the Punisher book is different than a lot of the other Marvel books on the shelf right now because it's actually sold with a content advisory sticker. Few are, and they definitely earn that sticker this issue as we see Zemo carve a Punisher skull into Frank's body, and actually he'll spend the bulk of this arc out of costume, so I thought that was kind of interesting that they give that to him. It's also very similar to the Hydra tattoo that Zemo himself has, and indeed the Hydra tattoo that evil Steve Rogers, the Supreme Commander, had. So, you know, I thought it was kind of fun that they bring that back. There's also another reason, too, why Punisher doesn't have his costume, and that is because Zemo has given his costume to Jigsaw, Billy Russo, one of the Punisher's oldest and most hated adversaries. Probably his arch nemesis, arguably, because he's one of the few villains of his that actually keep coming back and don't just get killed. The idea being is that while Frank is prisoner, Zemo wants Russo to run around as a fake Punisher, commit a bunch of crimes in Bagalia, and really try and, you know, turn the world's opinion of the Punisher against him. And, you know, Jigsaw plays just this hilarious, ridiculous version of the Punisher, just like turned up to 100. He literally just, you know, shouts into news cameras, "Oh boy, here I am the Punisher, here I go killing again, aren't I a jerk?" And that's kind of like a C-plot that goes all throughout this arc. You know, what's the fake Punisher up to now, and what does this mean for Bagalia? And, you know, will you know, the world at large turn against the Punisher? I mean, probably no more than they were already against the Punisher. I feel, you know, that subject is a little black or a little white. Either you're 100% for the Punisher or you're not, but yeah, that's that. Now, when Zemo eventually tires of torturing the Punisher in his house, he decides to send him off to a Hydra gulag in Bagalia to rot, a place, you know, filled wall to wall with political prisoners and anti-Zemo, anti-Hydra people, because obviously Bagalia as a nation, you know, is a place, you know, founded for terrorists and supervillains and what have you. So obviously the people they would deem to be prisoners are ultimately not that bad. It's in the prison that Frank, you know, just refuses to go along with the program, as you would assume he would. You know, he starts killing Hydra guards every day. Hydra guards who already hate him
him because he probably killed someone close to them to begin with. And eventually, you know, he keeps getting thrown back and forth to solitary confinement. He spends most of his time there, so much to the point that he grows a wicked head of hair and a righteous beard that we've never seen before. But all these fights with the guards eventually catch the attention of a nun, a woman by the name of Sister Mercedes, but who also goes by the name Sister Mercy, because that's way more comic booky. Turns out Sister Mercy actually knows the Punisher. They have a pre-existing relationship. She was a nun helping out with relief efforts in Venezuela when she first joined the convent back in the 80s. Why they even go as far as to reference the actual Punisher story that she came from. The Punisher toppled the government that, you know, was abusing people at that time, and she thought everything was going to be great because the bad people were gone. It only got 100% worse, because the next regime was even more terrible and abused people even worse, so much to the point that she even got one of her eyes messed up. So she's a blind nun here as a prisoner in Bagalia, but she's also kind of the de facto leader of all the prisoners here and the Zemo dissidents, and they desperately want Frank to join their cause. Which, as you might have guessed, trying to get the Punisher to join any sort of team is always going to be an uphill battle. He's a lone wolf. He doesn't play nice with others, and he especially is distrustful of this nun lady because he can already tell that Sister Mercy is trying to save his soul, as it were. You know, she tries to teach him the lessons that violence begets violence, and in fact, she was the victim of violence that he himself begat. And it's interesting that Rosenberg shines a light on this, because I feel a lot of stories, you know, kind of shy away from talking about Frank's own relationship with faith and his own relationship to God and everything, because if you read those Ennis books, which, pardon the pun here, you know, were always gospel to me when it came to writing the Punisher character, we found out that, you know, Francis Castiglione grew up, you know, in the Roman Catholic Church. He was an altar boy and everything, but, you know, he definitely strayed from the path, you know, more than anyone could ever imagine. And I think one of his most famous lines from Punisher Max is, you know, they used it in the Warzone movie too, the "some days I just want to get my hands on God." And eventually, though, you know, he will end up helping Sister Mercy when a bunch of the Hydra goons, you know, try and beat her up. He takes the beating for her, and he gets messed up so badly they have to do surgery on his brain because, you know, it's swelled up so bad. Punisher actually goes through, like, several appearance changes throughout this arc, which I thought was very interesting. You don't normally see that. We had Jesus Frank with the beard, then we have shaved head Stitches Frank later on, and, you know, begrudgingly, he decides that he will join the nuns' crusade, for lack of a better word, to try and escape, if only so he can finally have his rematch with Zemo. And it's from here we reach basically the middle part of this War in Bagalia arc, and I think that this issue is really the premier issue. It's the standout one. It's the big breakout storyline, but it's not done in the way you would assume a superhero breakout story would be done, mainly because the whole point of it is that the Punisher cannot get involved. He has to be in solitary confinement, and so the nun wants him to help build an army to, you know, turn the inmates into a fighting force so they can escape. But that's going to be hard because, again, this is a political prison full of, like, you know, cartoonists who got in trouble because they made fun of Zemo, and, you know, people who worked with labor rights groups and everything. They're not fighters. They have no idea what they're doing, and the Punisher has to work with them. And it's great because we see the entire, you know, breakout plot, which is very clever and very layered. They get a whole issue devoted to how exactly they break out of the prison, and the Punisher only shows up in the last 2 pages. It's everyone else having to, you know, get the items they need to poison guards and, you know, mess with pipes and water mains and, you know, steal Hydra outfits and everything so they can blend in. It's all very meticulously put together, and you can tell Rosenberg spent a long time working on this portion of the comic, because if this part didn't work, this whole story wouldn't work. It's also at this point, too, I remember that Taskmaster is actually involved in this story, too. Baron Zemo sends Taskmaster to basically keep an eye on Frank and make sure he doesn't escape. He's a very, very minor player in this story. He's not even the secondary villain because, you know, Jigsaw is the secondary villain. He's like the third tier villain, and he's ultimately defeated quite easily in this story too. I can understand why writers keep coming back to Taskmaster for Punisher, because they both have the skull motif, but I swear his win-loss ratio against the Punisher is just ridiculous at this point, but still keeps coming back. Taskmaster, he's a busy boy, he's a busy villain. He's in so many books right now. He's in Spider-Man, he's in this, he's in Captain America. Business is booming for the super mercenary, I tell you. Just can't get away from this guy. It's during the prison breakout, too, we get to see a side of Frank Castle, the Punisher, that never really gets shown all that much when it's not a flashback, and that is Frank as a leader of men, you know, him leading men into battle and him trying to, you know, protect the inmates that he has now, you know, inspired to do all this fighting. There's a great scene wherein one guy can't bring himself to kill any of his Hydra jailers, and Frank's like, okay, you know what, if that's you, I can't force you to do it if you don't want to, but just know full well that because you didn't kill these jailers, more of your friends and your comrades are going to die. But I can't ask you to do it. And I just thought, you know, that is an interesting piece of characterization for the Punisher, because he was a leader during the war and everything, but he's such, you know, a works alone guy now, and I wonder if one of the big reasons he works alone and why he doesn't want to share his whole punishment mission is maybe because, you know, he doesn't want to have to make those hard calls and have to ask people to kill on his behalf, that he wouldn't have it that way. It's a very short scene. It's maybe only like a couple panels long, but it was just one of those moments where I'm like, yeah, I see where you're going here. Yeah, few writers go here with that. I appreciated that panel, short though it was. Now, eventually, once the Punisher and everyone else gets beyond the walls, we get a very cool little scene wherein Sister Mercy, you know, offers Frank a gift, and, you know, it's a shirt. It's a Hydra shirt, but she's completely customized it to where now, instead of an octopus, it's a skull, as it should be. And I thought this was a fun little callback to the octopus skull he wore when he was working for Hydra in Secret Empire. Now the whole situation has been completely inversed, and I'm like, oh, isn't that fun and clever that they did that? And also, as soon as the Punisher leaves the prison, he has to leave it in style. He's stolen a full Hydra tank, but he's, you know, spray painted a skull on it and everything, and he vows that he's going to be coming for Zemo very soon. And Zemo sees this on TV alongside Jigsaw, who he had actually done a mock trial for Jigsaw as Punisher and had executed him on Bagalian television, the idea being, you know, if the world thinks the Punisher is dead, no one's going to come looking for him while I torture him. And Jigsaw is great in this moment with Zemo because, again, they form this super unlikely comedy duo where Jigsaw just keeps poking holes full of Zemo's plan, and he's like, okay, so, you know, you want to keep the Punisher alive, but, you know, what are you going to do when torturing him gets bored? Are you going to, like, turn him into a Hydra sleeper agent? And he's like, ooh, that's a good idea. Which, again, if you read Secret Empire, that's basically what happened anyway, and it didn't work out. Jigsaw further, you know, says, so, you know, you're a villain, and your whole country is filled with villains and criminals, and you brought the Punisher here to where you live, and you didn't think he was going to get out, and you didn't think he was going to kill everyone, and, you know, Zemo is just absolutely horrified by this, and, you know, Punisher breaks out on the same night. He's having a big dinner for dignitaries to try and get his country recognized, and he has this great thing where he's, like, trying to have this air of legitimacy about him and trying to pass himself off as this fancy world leader, only to completely crack under the pressure and start swearing and yelling at everyone, and it's just a great moment of unraveling. And again, just darkly humorous. People forget that those, you know, Garth Ennis Marvel Knights Punishers that everyone really liked were darkly funny, and I think, you know, a dark sense of humor is important to a good Punisher story, and Rosenberg definitely keeps that alive and well here in this story. Now, the big centerpiece finale of all of this is the Punisher just tear-assing right for Zemo's base of operations. Jigsaw is paid to intercede, and we get a really cool, like, Fast and the Furious style motorbike chase all over the city, and Jigsaw really gets to, you know, mouth off to the Punisher here, saying, you know, back in the day, I used to be your #1 villain, I used to be your arch nemesis, you know, what changed? You've been cheating on me with all of these Hydra guys, am I really gonna have to up my game now to maybe bring myself back to #1 in your eyes? And it's just really fun. Another gag, too, that I should probably talk about that I almost forgot, Rosenberg fills this story with references to other comic creators. There's a Hydra commander that Frank deals with all throughout this book, and his name is Duggan, which I'm sure is almost certainly a reference to Jerry Duggan, the comic creator, who, hey, just so happens to be writing the Punisher tie-in series for War of Realms that's out right now, so I figured that was a fun little Easter egg moment there. I like it when comic writers tag each other in their works. Now, eventually, when Zemo realizes that all is lost, that the Punisher is coming to kill him, and that all of his forces have fallen by the wayside, he pulls the ultimate coward move, and that is he essentially blows up his own country in hopes of blaming the Punisher, saying he did it, even though he faked his execution. And he tries to run. There's a great scene, at an airstrip where he tries to get into a fighter jet, only to have the Punisher, drop down on him, like the frickin' gremlin, in that old science fiction story, and he starts tearing at the wing and trying to get at him. Eventually, he gets Zemo to crash into the ocean, and Zemo hopes that he's done with the Punisher, that he's dead, even though he knows that this entire thing was one giant gong show, and his country has totally fallen. The Punisher took down an entire nation. He toppled an entire country in just a few days, and he did it from prison and without his costume and without his gear. The big stinger as the comic comes to a close and this arc comes to a close is that, okay, Zemo failed here, now he's going to try and regroup in New York, which is a terrible idea because that's the Punisher's stomping ground, don't you know? Now, as we join the beginning of this story, which starts in issue 12 and goes all the way to issue number 16, Frank is on a desert island. He's near death after falling in the water after trying to latch onto Zemo's plane at the end of the previous arc. He's near death, but he's actually rescued by some very unlikely people. A bunch of Hydra deserters, some of which he even actually knows. Some of these people are actually political prisoners who were in the same prison in Bagalia as Frank was. They left the group and then quickly joined right back up again to try and save their own skin and hopefully try and immigrate to America. Needless to say, Frank is pretty unhappy with these guys. And in fact, the way Frank ultimately deals with the Hydra deserters sets kind of a benchmark and sets up an ongoing theme that's going to be explored throughout this arc, and that is how exactly Frank deals with people. You see, Hydra reinforcements are coming to the island, and so he's able to get all of these guys together to put up a kind of guerrilla front because they know if they're running away, they're probably going to be shot too. This is a fun little segment because Frank Castle goes into straight-on Rambo mode, rigging the island with explosives and traps, and he makes a bunch of arrows. It's all very fun stuff. Ultimately, though, even after the Punisher gets what he wants and is able to steal a boat and make it back to America, he still kills a couple of the deserters even though they were fighting next to him a minute ago. Like I said, setting up a theme, the Punisher can always surprise you, and when he does surprise you, it's usually pretty brutal and not too nice. Now, Baron Zemo actually managed to beat the Punisher back to New York, and if you've been reading a lot of Marvel Comics right now, you'll know that the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, just so happens to be the mayor of New York right now, so naturally Zemo decides to look him up and hope to get some help. What's cool about this is that Fisk has absolutely zero time for Zemo. He does not like him at all. He thinks he's a poor businessman. He thinks he's a poor leader. He thinks he's a guy who inherited his name, inherited his fortune, and yet even despite all of that, he's just squandering it. So, you have old money versus new money of the criminal underworld. But Fisk still has to work with him, though, if only to keep him quiet, because the Kingpin is still trying right now to make it look like he's a legitimate mayor, and he just can't have the leader of Hydra stomping around his city and causing trouble, especially when he knows that Zemo being here means the Punisher is going to be after him anytime soon. Much like in the last arc, too, what's fun about what Rosenberg does with Zemo is that he makes him darkly funny, and that these scenes with him and Kingpin are essentially just villainous dick measuring and dick waving. Also, too, I was a huge fan of Matthew Rosenberg's criminally underrated Kingpin miniseries, and I was really hoping to see some connective tissue between that story and this one. You get it, but you get it in kind of an unsatisfying way. We actually do kind of learn the fate of Sarah Dewey, Kingpin's autobiographer and maybe love interest. He says that she's dead in this story, which really hurt me. Now, I don't know if that's Kingpin being facetious or not, but still, I really would have liked to have seen more of that story get connected here. Also, too, for those of you who are wondering, oh, are we finally going to get to see the Punisher go up against the Kingpin in a big, meaningful way in this story? No, actually. In fact, they don't actually meet up until the end, which is slightly disappointing. Now, the Punisher is barely back in New York for 15 minutes when he gets accosted by a group of cops, and I'm pretty sure you think you know where this is going. They're going to try and arrest him, right? Because he's a wanted criminal, even more so now after the assassination of the Mandarin a few arcs back. But no, these are different types of cops. These cops love the Punisher. In fact, they're big old Punisher fanboys, right down to having his skull logo all over their cruisers. And if this seems like something you may have heard of,
Yeah, cops in real life do this. And it's just as disconcerting in real life as it is here in the comic. Even Jerry Conway, the creator of The Punisher, has railed on social media about how just wrong-headed and really messed up that is for cops and soldiers and people to, really love and venerate the Punisher when they shouldn't, because, he's the ultimate cautionary tale. And here in this story, Matthew Rosenberg basically meets this thing head-on with the Punisher ripping up the logo from their cars and saying, hey, you want a hero? Go look up to Captain America. Do not look up to me. I am crazy, in case you couldn't tell. I did not choose to uphold, to protect, and serve. You guys did. Do your damn job, and if you don't, I'll be seeing you again very soon. The Punisher, of course, having a very complicated history with the cops in Marvel Comics. Sometimes he swears not to kill cops, but that doesn't stop him from doing it anyway. Sometimes it's a whole big thing, and here we actually get to see it explored in a pretty meaningful way. I like now that we actually have something that we can point to in continuity to say, yes, this is how the Punisher feels about the police. Now, what is exactly Baron Zemo's plan for New York and the Kingpin? Well, it's actually kind of clever. Because he is still the deposed leader of a foreign nation, one that he kind of blowed up to gain sympathy, he's going to disguise a bunch of Hydra soldiers as UN troops so he can bring weapons and more of his men into New York City. He's going to dress them up like UN troops, so if the Punisher starts killing them, as he is wont to do, he'll look like an even bigger bad guy right now. Fisk wants a piece of this too, not wanting Zemo to outdo him, and so he vows to bring back the Vigil group, which is an anti-vigilante group from 90s Punisher stories. They had ridiculous costumes in, and they're a really, really deep pull here. But we don't actually get it, though, because Zemo blindsides Mayor Fisk again by saying, you know what? To help out these UN troops, I'm also re-establishing the Thunderbolt, like the original OG Thunderbolts. Not like the Marvel version of the Suicide Squad under Norman Osborn that I think most people are familiar with. I'm talking like, the original ones where all these bad guys pretended to be superheroes to dupe the public. They never do actually mention how the public feels about the Thunderbolts team coming back again with more or less the same lineup. But, there it is. Now, it's at this point, too, that Black Widow ends up approaching the Punisher. Naturally, Natasha doesn't like the idea of literal jackbooted thugs walking all over New York City, but the Punisher doesn't know how to feel. He still thinks they're UN guys, and he also doesn't quite trust Black Widow right now because she was working with Nick Fury. Nick Fury was the one who sold him out to Baron Zemo and got him locked up in Bagalia in the first place. Basically, Nick Fury is, for all intents and purposes, the main villain of the Rosenberg Punisher run, if you want to break it down. Turns out, though, the Hydra UN guys aren't very smart at all because they literally wore their green and yellow uniforms under their UN uniforms, which means when the Punisher does start killing them and does start routing them in the street, it's very easy for people to tell, oh yeah, wait, Hydra is behind this. Even Kingpin is upset, too, because he hoped that if he was able to bring in the Punisher after all the bad stuff he's done, that he would be greeted as a hero. Now that's not going to happen, which gives him yet another reason to hate Baron Zemo and want him out of his city that much faster. Eventually, the newly reformed Thunderbolts are able to track the Punisher down, and while Frank is still very good, he is ultimately, at the end of the day, one man, while the Thunderbolts are many superpowered individuals, which makes the fight that much more dangerous. He's almost killed, too, until Black Widow is able to swoop on in and save him. Natasha has her own ideas, too. If Punisher is going to go up against Zemo, who called in his old friends, maybe it's time for the Punisher to call in some friends of his own. The only problem is the Punisher doesn't have many friends, or if he does, he's terrible at keeping them. But all the same, Black Widow managed to recruit Moon Knight, who, don't you love Moon Knight? He's getting a show soon, so he should get some more pushes in there. And Night Thrasher. Yeah, the guy with the skateboard. He's here too. Maybe Frank should make some more friends, eh? You might also be thinking to yourself, too, wait a minute, the Punisher and a team of anti-heroes versus the original Thunderbolts? Is this harkening back to the time when Punisher was himself on an incarnation of the Thunderbolts, or Thunderbolts Red, as I like to call them, because everyone on it had a Red's color scheme? I certainly like to think so, and that's not the only thing from the Punisher's past that Matthew Rosenberg manages to dig up here, because we see Rachel Alvers show up here. Yes, Yes, that's right, from the Greg Rucka run. I'm guessing a lot of people don't remember her, but she was the female Punisher sidekick who I guess some people have dubbed Lady Punisher, but she never really got that name. A lot was kind of left unsaid between these two characters and still sort of remains unsaid here in this arc, but it is definitely cool to see her come back again and to see that, yeah, someone actually remembers this character. Now, after the Punisher slipped through his fingers yet again, Zemo gets a brand new idea, and that is sitting on his hands and doing nothing in hopes that his many henchmen will soften the Punisher up so he can swoop on in for the kill. Although personally, I like to think Zemo is just afraid now after the Punisher literally chased him out of his own country, chased him everywhere, and he's just hoping no one realizes how scared he is. Well, Fisk realizes, though. In fact, Fisk starts swinging his own Kingpin dick around, saying, hey, you better go out there and do something or I'm not going to harbor you anymore. And wouldn't you know it, ultimately in the Battle of the Bad Guys, it's Kingpin who ends up victorious, and Zemo in his full-on Citizen V attire has to join the fight. This leads to a very cool and very clever little action scene wherein Zemo is directing a tank to chase the Punisher and our heroes through the winding streets of New York, and they just can't quite do it because a tank was not meant to ever roll through the streets of New York. It's at this point everything comes to a head in a big, large, protracted battle wherein everybody fights everybody and everybody gets to show off, except maybe for Zemo's Thunderbolts, who do kind of feel like a bit of an afterthought here, though we do get a truly hilarious joke wherein the Fixer, one of the longest tenured member on any versions of the Thunderbolts, says, ah yes, Punisher, I've been waiting for us to finally have a duel, only for Frank to kill him and go, dude, I don't even know who you are. It's during all of this chaos, though, Rachel actually steps on in to try and save the Punisher from Zemo, which only serves to actually get her kidnapped by Zemo. But this isn't your traditional damsel in distress type of story wherein the villain says, yes, come and face me, Punisher, for our final confrontation. No, it's actually kind of played for dark laughs because Zemo runs off with the girl and the ghost, but leaves the rest of his team behind. Which, if you've been paying attention up until this point when the Punisher is left alone with a group of ne'er-do-wells, obviously his first intention is to kill them all dead, because it's what they deserve, right? Night Thrasher, who hilariously becomes the voice of reason in this situation, says, hey, you know, we might be anti-heroes, we might be a little bit more hardcore, but I'm not going to murder someone for you, Punisher. In fact, if you do kill these guys, you can just go on ahead on your own, because we're not going to help you anymore, and this short-lived team is going to be even shorter-lived. And again, you think, oh, when given this choice, is Punisher gonna maybe learn a lesson? Is he maybe gonna, you know, try and even just maintain that he is a normal person in front of these other heroes if it means he can get Zemo his ultimate goal? Nah, actually, he's totally fine just being Frank and just being a killer. And again, keeping with this bigger theme, the Punisher will surprise you because the Punisher will almost always just do whatever he wants. He cannot be changed. Now, surprisingly, the whole team doesn't leave him. Danny Ketch, the Ghost Rider, decides to stick around, if only because as a Ghost Rider, it is his job to do the penance stares to killers, and who is a bigger killer than the Punisher? He gets hit with the penance stare, but really, for Frank, that's just like drinking a little bit of espresso, man. That's just, thank you, Danny, I needed that little pick-me-up. Oh, sure, the penance stare drives normal people to the brink of madness, but I, the Punisher, am not normal people, and I don't feel bad about anything I've done, so, you know. Now, Frank is so damn dedicated to getting Zemo and putting this crazy story to an end, he's willing to sacrifice his own body, launching himself off Ghost Rider's motorcycle through a plate glass window just so he can get on the same floor as the Hydra bad guy. At this point, too, we get the classic action movie stand-up, oh, don't come any closer or I'll kill the girl. Only again, this is Punisher we're dealing with here, and he is not your traditional action hero, so he willingly shoots through Rachel to shoot Zemo. Rachel doesn't hold it against him either. She's just like, that's a pretty good shot, passed right through me, and you know what? I would do the same if I was you, because I'm also crazy like you. This leads to Punisher and Zemo having themselves a big fist fight. Zemo even gets unmasked during this, and once again, Rosenberg does an excellent job just painting Zemo as this really pathetic individual who's just like, why are you doing this to me? Why won't you stop? Do you want money? I'll give you money. I'll give you whatever you want. But the Punisher only wants one thing: Zemo dead. Now, to this point, too, you're probably saying to yourself, hey, didn't the Ghost stick around from the Thunderbolts? Yes, he did, and the Ghost ultimately saves Zemo from getting stabbed to death with his own sword by the Punisher, and that is because, well, Ghost is a straight-up mercenary, and he actually took money from Fisk. Yes, that's right. The Ghost was actually on Fisk's side. Fisk didn't want any more bodies on his hand. He just wanted Zemo to get the hell out of New York and stop being a problem for him. You know, get out of his no hair, if you will. But Zemo is so prideful and such a fanatic, really in his own way a dark mirror to the Punisher. He refuses to leave. He refuses to be done with Fisk, and when he won't listen to reason, Fisk has Zemo killed himself, in doing so robbing the Punisher of the prize that he has sought pretty much since the end of Secret Empire, when you really break it down. Of course, the Punisher isn't really someone to get hung up on this sort of thing. Oh, sure, he's mad he won't get to do Zemo in, but he has the famous Kingpin in front of him right now, and Kingpin he knows has done wrong, so he'll just kill him instead, even though doing so would mean that he would be killing the mayor of New York City, which, you know, is a pretty big deal, but considering he offed the Mandarin at the beginning of this story arc, you know, killing one political leader, killing another political reader. It's at this point right here, though, the story really gets interesting and really becomes a full circle, because Nick Fury Jr. shows up again, and he's brought with him his whole covert Avengers team, the one who have been really been tracking Punisher down since the whole Warmachine debacle. Nick Fury Jr., for all intents and purposes, being the real villain of this story, and we really start to see the dichotomy between him and Punisher start to take shape, and that is, you know, Punisher does bad things, but he never argues that what he does is bad and that he should be punished for what he does. Nick Fury, on the other hand, does a lot of bad things, a lot of underhanded things, but still very much thinks himself the hero and thinks that he should be lauded and applauded for what he does. And so really what you have here is matter versus antimatter. Nick Fury isn't going to let the Punisher kill the Kingpin, but the Punisher isn't going to leave here until somebody is dead, and that person might actually surprise you who ends up dead. You see, the Punisher rushes the Kingpin, and it's Black Widow who actually takes up to defend him, shooting him to the point that he actually falls off the building. Now, for all intents and purposes, they assume Frank is dead. He fell to his death if the bullet itself didn't kill him. Of course, they never do recover the body, and Nick Fury Jr. is very skeptical as to where exactly Natasha's loyalties lie. After all, she's the one who reached out to the Punisher, she was the one who broke him out, and even though she swears up and down that, you know, she had nothing to do with this, the writing seems to be on the wall, and that is the Punisher is going to be slumbering for a bit now until he returns, perhaps sooner rather than later. And it's on that note right there the comic comes to a close, everyone. And so that was The Punisher Volume 4, War in the Streets by Matthew Rosenberg. And while I enjoyed it, I would be lying if I said I thought it was the strongest work he had turned in. I get the distinct feeling that they kind of had to wrap this story up and that it was probably meant to go on a little longer, if not have a third and final part. I do think, though, taken as a whole, the Rosenberg run from the Warmachine stuff to this final arc right here actually does tell a pretty damn interesting story of the Punisher, the ultimate vigilante, the ultimate outsider in the Marvel hero spectrum, really kind of clashing with the rest of the universe and really kind of clashing with the hypocrisy of a lot of these other Avengers and superheroes who do get away with killing, but because they kill differently than he does, or at least, you know, listen to different types of masters than he does. I think it's kind of interesting and kind of funny. Also, too, even though this is quote-unquote the end of the Punisher, he's not going away at all. In fact, Garth Ennis will be writing a brand new run in the Max line very soon, and I will most definitely be excited to check that one out when I get the chance.